So, are they hearing me online? Are we recording? All right. If you're at home, I need you to go get yourself a glass of some kind. And you will probably, hopefully, have accessed the packet that everybody else will have here. But you'll need a glass about midway through for experiential learning. So I run an intensive outpatient program, which is what it sounds like. It's 4 days a week, 3 hours a day, really, with kids are struggling. And so I like to do things like this and hopefully put as many tools as I can into your guys' hands so you don't end up coming to see me. But if you do need more, then you can do on your own or do with an individual therapist. Then we are here and available, kind of thing. So I got a lot of material, so I'm going to keep going. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll try and clarify or whatever. We are going to make this available. I feel like awkwardly tall right now compared to all of you. So much to on-camera people, I may end up sitting on the edge of the stage because it seems more comfortable. I want to start with kind of the theory that I work under, and it's called biosocial. It's kind of an accepted theory in the system that we are all created or made out of our biology. So our genetics, you know, what's going on inside, genetic makeup, neurological condition, and we're also made up of social environment. Just things that happen to us in our life, and these transact together. You know, and probably most of you sometime today had some kind of transaction where you went in and you paid for something, but they had to have it in stock, so it kind of had to be there, and then you had to give them some. So transaction is that back and forth process between the two. All right, and so this is really important just to everything we're going to talk about, because sometimes I'm going to end up spending some time on the social side and be talking about parenting or something that's going on in the environment with peers. And I want to be clear that I always think that's interacting with what's going on in their biology. And if a young person has a predisposition towards some kind of condition or logical thing, and that interacts with their social environment, how they're raised, and those kind of things. And so to kind of, well, to hit on a couple things, is important. Every line in that sentence is important. So biology. You know, some people are actually born with a disposition towards emotional dysregulation. I have a no, he's not 3 anymore, but we've seen it since he was 3. He's now 5 and starting kindergarten. And honest to goodness, we can go from just giggling, happy, and ecstatic to like a really like what seems like a small no to full-on tears. Like that cycle is just huge in him. He's also very anxious and attachment kind of things. And so as we move him into school, we're already looking at this because he's more sensitive. And they're born with more intense emotions. Emotions hit like a ton of bricks. Impulsivity also has a biological basis. All right. So regulating, so just saying that somebody is impulsive, like that's like they chose to be that or something, it does have a biological factor. They find it harder to be organized and more effective in that way. And so that's, you know, that's some of the challenges that are just biologically inherent to them. And that starts interacting with the world. And the more and more the world wants them to be organized, I mean, it's a challenge getting she was off because of a complete like COVID break, but she had nothing. We got it tested and everything. Took all her homework in on Monday. Did she turn a single whit of that in on Tuesday when she got to school? No, she got home Tuesday. Oh, I didn't. Where didn't you turn that? No. She is not organized internally with those kind of things. All right. So biology transacts with an environment. An invalidating social environment can make it hard to regulate emotions. So an invalidating environment doesn't understand your emotions. And here I'll, you know, talk about myself as a dad. It is really hard when your 5-year-old cries at the drop of a hat. It's just challenging to understand, did I do anything? Did I say, what just occurred there that caused this tear? So there are times I am putting him in an invalidating environment. And so I'm actually having to grow in some of these same areas. So transacting, if an environment is invalidating, and I would just argue that most of our young people are in an invalidating environment between you know, their social media, regular media, even friend groups are at times mean to each other, and just the world doesn't seem to make sense to them. So there's a lot of invalidation, and it's the transaction that counts, all right? So biology and social environment influence the person. The person reciprocates and influences his or her social environment. And so this is how relationships are built, back and forth between those kind of things. I think, yes. So I want to put this into perspective with the whole COVID thing, because there is literally a environmental issue or a social issue that has now impacted a lot of young people's biology and their concerns and predispositions. And so if any of you have been struggling more in the last year, there is some stats to back that up, all right? So they did a study, and they looked at millions and millions of actual insurance claims before and during COVID times and what was going on with young people. So some of the big findings are that kids feel like they don't have much control over their lives. And I would argue we're going to see the consequences of that for the next, I think these 10 to 20-year-olds are, it's like their depression. Like, you know, you think back to the depression. They're not certain that any function that's on the calendar is going to happen. All right. I mean, so it's just put an amount of uncertainty into there, and that leads to, well, if I don't know that I'm going to get to prom, I may as well have as much fun as I can right now. If that's, you know, if you're leaning in that way. So they don't have much control over their life. I would say in our program, we have seen an increase in young people whose biological parents are divorced through COVID, like even more. It's a challenge in itself, but through COVID, without structure, without kind of the mediating factor of school would be my current working theory, that it really even made more challenging between the players. All right, so developmental process has been interfered with because of COVID. Their trajectory where they were supposed to be going has been interrupted and changed. So now when kids look into the future, they're not looking at one that wasn't what they pictured before. I don't think I wrote that right. It's not what they thought would be coming. It is not what they were expecting. And this kind of pain is just too easy to self-medicate. If not drugs, then distractions like hours on TikTok or YouTube. And this article, these came from the article, but the emotional blowback of the pandemic can't be vaccinated away. All right, so we are going to be dealing with this and the impact on young people for a long time. So some of the stats, they looked at 13 to 18-year-olds and then somewhat the younger adults. In both groups, they found sharp spikes in the middle of COVID from 2019 to 20 in a lot of conditions. So major depression, general anxiety, adjustment disorder, self-harm, substance abuse, overdoses, ADHD, tic disorders, all of these showed a spike. So what that suggests is a lot of young people who had a predisposition, so a biological predisposition, but somehow their environment was mediating for that and they were doing okay. So COVID changed that, all right? And then all of these things spiked that might not have spiked. Some definite statistics that we have from that is that there was a 334% spike in intentional self-harm among 13 to 18-year-olds in August of 2020 compared to the same month of 2019. This isn't self-report. This is actual young people who went and got treatment and used their insurance to get treatment. So we're not even covering the uninsured or the unreported who had a spike, but just the people that had insurance and used it. It was a 334% spike in self-harm. Close to 50% increase in depression and a close to 70% increase in general anxiety among the young adults, but then also in the younger adults. So with that, starting with that incredibly good news, I'm gonna slow us down, and this is also slowing myself down because I did youth ministry for about 10 years when I was unmarried and didn't have kids, all right? And I just could not ever understand why these parents couldn't remember my one random event in the middle of the month and have all the pieces right. Well, I'll tell you what, 4 kids and a business, and I'm lucky to know what day it is. So at this point, I wanted to set the stage and also share that if you've been having more struggles than you thought, or you're a young person, like this is not the trajectory I had seen prior to COVID, yeah, that's actual fact. I mean, that's not just a made up, and we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with that as a population level. So with that, I want to teach you a breathing skill, a coping skill. I would say from the 300 plus young people that we've had go through our program, this is their favorite. It's pretty easy, and so it's called square breathing or box breathing. And I'm just going to count for you. Essentially, you breathe in very slowly for a full 4 count. You hold the breath in for a 4 count. You exhale slowly for a 4 count, and then you hold the air out for a 4 count. And we'll do that like 3 times. And so if you'd all join me, if it's easier for you to close your eyes, I'm hoping we all can just calm down and into this space. And you guys at home too, this is a really good, I mean, I will tell you, almost every young person actually uses this one and says it's helpful. So with that, if you would all breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold it in, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold it out, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold it in, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold it out, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold it in, 2, 3, 4. Exhale slowly, 2, 3, 4. Hold it out, 2, 3, 4. I, for one, am slightly calmer. Maybe I'll talk a little slower now. Did anybody else notice, let me go with you guys in here, did that calm you down to do that? And you can do it as, you know, that was a pretty short one, just doing it 3 times, but you can literally do that in your car, you can do that in a meeting. And so really like that one. So that's breathe. You all have a card in your packet, those that are here, that has breathe on it, the square breathing symbol, so you can practice that one on your own. All right. I will say probably there's 2 phrases that I hear most often from parents. The first one is, well, as I look back, it feels like it started in middle school. So it's interesting that we're in a middle school. And then the second phrase is, I really, when there's any struggles in their home, like I'm walking on eggshells. Anyone in here and online with us ever feel like they're walking on eggshells? And what does that mean? Yeah, I'm gonna right back here. What's that mean to you guys in your household when you think you're walking on eggshells? Yeah, I'm looking at you.
Emotional outburst above and beyond what
yeah. Yeah. Right, yeah, it's the fear factor that gets in there too, doesn't it? Like, I don't even want to ask something at this point. You had raised your hand. Yeah.
We're not going to ruffle anything. I'm not getting my blood pressure. I'm not hurt. We're going to handle our stress. I was like, stress management is like,
yeah. Anybody else have any kind of different experience? Yeah.
I'm the exact opposite. He's very calm, so really good kid. And I find myself like, I grounded him from his phone 3 days ago, and I knew I had to do it because he didn't clean his room. That was it. But I don't want to send, he doesn't even react. He's fine. He literally just hands it to me, says fine. But I'm afraid like he's going to go in his room, and then maybe I just took away his only interaction with his only friend. Or, you know, maybe I made him sad, or I did, but removing that from him, do I take his only way of talking to his only few friends away? Is that's
Oh,
why I
yeah.
walk on eggshells.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about his outbursts. I'm worried about parenting. Like, what do I take away from him and what do I not? How do I cut him off from,
Mm-hmm.
you can't go anywhere, but then I want him to go somewhere because he hardly ever goes anywhere.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I love that we've got kind of both sides of this eggshell thing. One is I don't want to stop the good things that are happening,
Exactly.
and that seems like it's way too easy to do. And the other is I don't want to trigger anything because, you know, my whole evening's ruined. My heart pressure's up and everything else that goes like that. Well, I think we kind of all know, and I literally entitled the first time I tried to do a parenting course, Walking on Eggshells. And then over the last year or two, as I thought about it, I'm like, no, that's not what I want to, not what I want you guys to leave with. And I want you to leave with, I need to be a bold parent. I still need to be a bold parent, even if I'm dealing with emotional dysregulation. I mean, there are just emotional needs. I may not dive into that too much tonight, but there are still things. And so I now use the term both bold because it stands for something that we'll get to, but also just our young people need us to be parents, and to be this force in their life, kind of thing. There's a couple different views on what might get you to did I go backwards while I was sitting there? Hopefully you didn't do that on screen. No, good. Don't need to show my, the things I don't do well on there. All right. Some of you might be able to resonate with this image. So it's one view of the path to eggshell. So you give an order or a command, and command is kind of literature language, but you're hoping for compliance. Is there compliance? Yes. Oh, we get to go on with the rest of our day. Is there not compliance? All right. Well, parent repeats command. Again, we've got the choice of compliance, and then we get to go do other things, maybe have a normal day, or no. And this could be ignoring, crying, running away. And there's actually research. This is not just a made up, like I've experienced this, and yes, I've experienced this, but somebody has studied this. And this typical first loop happens 3 to 7 times in lots and lots of families where the young person is not, not being compliant. So then you get a no. Well, what do we do as parents? Well, we start threatening. Time out when they're younger, phones as they get older, lack of opportunities, those kind of things. And the same exact loop, okay? So if the threat works, we go on and we have other interactions. If not, if we don't get compliance, it's no. This is where you can have screaming, isolation, self-harm, and real or threatened. And I hear that often enough that my young person will actually, threaten that I'm going to go do something to myself if you do take my phone away. Sounds like that may not be his tone, but I know a lot of young ladies who might do something like that, who have actually tried. All right, so now we still haven't gotten whatever our command or what we had hoped to get done that evening done. What do you do as a parent? Up the ante. This is really very sensitive, or my hands are very clumsy. You either up the ante and you go with force and, or aggression. And that actually ends up leading, if that's consistent or inconsistent enough, your young people walking on eggshells around you, which is also probably not a good idea. Or you acquiesce, you give up, and you start walking on eggshells. Does it make sense to people that this is kind of lived experience? I want to share another view, and I am not denying this command compliance can be one of the pathways, and one that young people literally, like, I mean, I know for a fact my 10-year-old can do the things we ask her to do sometimes, and she still ignores us, or she's still involved in whatever she happens to be doing, or she comes and does a half, incredible job and then goes on and thinks it's done, and all of that frustrates my wife immensely. But another view is that behaviors serve a purpose. And I'm going to share this view because, especially I use the DBT model, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, and I use DNAV, which is ACT for adolescence, and ACT is acceptance commitment therapy. And DBT actually has the in it that you think the best of the person you're interacting with, that they're actually attempting to do the best they can. So if they're not doing the task, it is not because it's defiance, it's because it is whatever they're doing is serving a purpose for them. All right, whether we understand that purpose or not is a whole different ball game. All right, and so you could put terms of boundary testing, which is a lot of us as parents, and especially as I do not like my children testing my boundaries. All right, that, you know, as a guy, I'm just like, I'm going to fight against that. They're just going to get stronger, these boundaries, if you fight against them. Or skill deficiency. And I like this image as, you know, because can anybody actually calculate that anymore? I sure can't. And if that was a core part of my daily tasks, it wouldn't happen. But to give you an example of what this looks like, so back in, again, my youth ministry days, this young person, she was a gifted student, was failing algebra. So freshman algebra, she's a gifted student across the boards, she's failing algebra, all right? Well, it's starting to be like she doesn't want to do her algebra, and she doesn't like the teacher, and she's starting to complain about it, and it's starting to cause problems at home, all right? So in this case, the parents sent her to me for tutoring, per se. And as we're doing this, about 15 minutes in, what I figure out is not that this young lady is not motivated or not trying or is just being defiant on the algebra thing. She literally doesn't know her multiplication. You cannot do algebra if you don't have multiplication backwards and forward. Like those numbers just need to mean something when you multiply them, all right? Well, literally, if I did sent her home and told her parents she needed to learn her multiplication table, she learned them and aced algebra, all right, because she's a gifted student. But that is a clear deficiency. Does that make sense? It was not defiance. It was turning uglier in her home, and it was leading her to not think well of herself. But that's the difference between boundary testing and skill deficiency. And the skills that an adolescent, I'm going to move on the camera, but the skill domains that an adolescent has to successfully kind of get is, can they regulate themselves? All right, are they able to regulate themselves? Are they able to regulate their behavior? Not impulsive, not just do whatever comes to mind. Emotion regulation, can they manage that when they're sad to still function? When they're happy, can they control that so they don't do some kind of risky behavior? Interpersonal regulation is, can I interact with other people? Am I effective in my relationships? All right, I haven't shared my whole story, but we've adopted a couple of kids who have trauma. So I've got one in first grade. We've literally had to move because we think it's his way of attempting to build relationships, but he's like touching people and other things, and so we've had to stop the touching because that's not a good idea. But today, apparently, you know, fun today kind of news is that mass to mass, he grabbed somebody and planted a kiss on him twice, 2 different times. So in some cases, this is him not being able to regulate either both his behavior and his interpersonal kind of things mixing together. He's 6. We're hoping we can get that under control. And then finally, they've got to be able to regulate their cognitive patterns, how their brain is organized, what they do with that, and then that plays into family conflict. All right, so dysregulation in any of these domains could be both a biological concern, to bring you back to that, a skill deficiency, or quite frankly, probably both. All right, regularly I started with a skill deficiency, now it's gotten past where I can even act like it or fake like it, and it's become an actual, it's changed who they are. And this is what transaction means, is that if you're not getting the skills you're supposed to, your biology adapts to that, both positive and negative ways. So I like this image a whole lot, because this green area right here, the window of tolerance is when we like our young people and we like our friends. That's when we're building relationships, we're connecting, communication, those kind of things. You know, we're in self-control, our systems are working the way we would like them to work. All right, healthy skill development, so that list of skills only occurs when we are in our window of tolerance. That does not mean things are learned when they freeze or shut down and dissociate, or that they don't learn things when they move into fight or flight mechanisms, but both of those are dysregulated, and very rarely are they healthy coping skills that they're learning when they are dysregulated. Struggling teens have a really small window of tolerance. There's lots of ways in our program that we work to expand that window of tolerance, but that's an important way to think about it. Are they capable? So the eggshell is that usually we feel like either that window's so small or they're somewhere right near the edge and we think we're going to push them over if we happen to do this at that moment, all right? This image is actually on the online packet. I'm going to post the slides too. Carissa did a great job with that image, and it's just an amazing way to think about it and how dysregulation can go both ways, all right? Fight or flight, or the whole freeze and dissociation and flat affect, numbness. There's a term right now, flat, that people just feel flat all the time, and that would probably be they've sunk down into this area, all right? So those regulation skills are needed for adolescents to accomplish their developmental tasks. All right, so during this age of adolescence, there are actually some things all of us needed to learn, all adolescents actually need to be able to do. They need to establish an identity. Like they need to think I am a person and hopefully like that person. They need to establish independence and autonomy from, just they need to feel capable of being independent and that they might be able to take care of themselves. They actually need to practice intimacy and closeness in relationships. They need to adjust to a developing and changing body, and they need to adjust to their brain development. So the literature on brain development is the second largest brain expansion, neurons being built is in that early adolescent period. The biggest one is obviously birth to one, where it's just exploding, but it is, researchers talk about it in the same way, that area between 12 and 15, 11 and 14, that brain is just expanding, and they have to develop with that, all right? Oh, now I can think about them and me and who and all these connections. I can think about what happens over here to there, and so that brain development has to be adjusted to, all right? Skills and tasks aren't easy, and quite frankly, they're frequently messy. And again, we walk back and to the pandemic and COVID and shutdown, and we've changed the trajectory on a lot of these because they didn't get the normal ways of working on these skills. So again, they aren't easy for everyone, and they're frequently messy. All right, so I'd like you to turn to page 1 in your packet. You do have a packet for a purpose online. Hopefully you have a packet. All of these tasks and skills lead to parenting dilemmas. You have to figure out how to help them navigate, get these skills, and to complete these tasks. And, in DBT, it hits on these 3 kind of continuums. Being too lenient or being too strict, all right? So do you have clear rules and enforce them consistently, at the same time be willing to negotiate on some issues? And so this, being lenient to being strict, how you do that is how young people learn how to build their own boundaries, internally and externally. And when we teach boundaries, these are kind of the big categories that we're going to look at. What are your boundaries around time and communication, personal space, intimacy, that kind of stuff. All right? You got making light of problem behaviors. So this is, I don't know. I'll go back to my childhood. Oh, they threw, some kind of M80 in the post box. All right. Well, yes, might have occurred. Do we make light of that? Well, do we still make light of it the 3rd time it happens, kind of thing? Or do we make too much of typical behaviors? All right. So the kid that once every couple weeks comes running in angry, slams the door, and doesn't want to talk to you that night. Do we like, well, we need to get therapy. We got to watch this. We got to are we making too much of what's actually probably a typical behavior? So I'd like you all to take a minute and mark yourself. Place the the last one is holding on too tight or forcing independence too soon. All right. So are you, keeping them in such a box that they're not actually learning responsibility, or are you forcing independence too soon and they're having to be, again, I go back to my kids, my 6-year-old had to survive on his own in some cases. And so it's hard for him to trust other people to help with that. All right. And so this is a hard continuum for me right now. So place an X on each of those continuum that notes where you are right now. No one's going to have to share these answers. And an O where you kind of want to be. So dialectics, means that there can be two things that are both true, and that there's an extreme, and we need to find a way to walk the middle path. And so these are kind of things that all of these are important. All right. There are things we need to not be so serious about that look like problem behaviors. And sometimes, we need to say, yeah, there's going to be consequences right here. So give you a minute. I want you to place an X and an O and just do some self-evaluation at this point. What? Oh, will do. This is my first real attempt at doing an in-person and streaming event at the same time. Anyone guess? Anyone want to guess where your young people want you to be on lenient to strict? It's really a fascinating conversation, quite frankly, when their parents aren't in the room. And it's really a lot closer to the middle than you would ever imagine. That they fully realize that they have friends whose parents are lenient, and that kid doesn't even believe their parents love them, right? Because they're just so loosey-goosey. And then, even the ones that they think their parents are super strict recognize that it's keeping them safer in the world, and that they can navigate it. So I kind of thought it would always lean to the lenient side, but they actually do a very nice job on that. They won't ever share that directly with you per se, but you do need to think about where you are on those things, and if you need to shift any of those, because those have significant impact on the developmental skills and the tasks that need to be developed. All right, so in your packet, again, on the next page, actually, you've got a whole list. I've not put all of them up on the screen here, but a whole list of typical behaviors, and then when it becomes a cause for concern. And you'll see these could be put on the same kind of arrows that I put the parenting things on, because really most problem behaviors are just an extreme form of what you would expect in a young person. All right, and then regularly they're possibly due to the challenges of learning the skills or tasks or parenting. So all three of those things now impact how a young person is going to do their typical behavior to whether it becomes a cause for concern. So increased moodiness. This is actually typical for adolescents. All right, cause for long-lasting moods. Risky mood-dependent behavior, major depression, injury, or suicidal thinking. And you can see where it's pretty easy to be like in this day and age to have a young person who's moody for a couple of days in a row and then have concerns. That's a hard line to walk. There's not a perfect answer for that. It is typical of adolescents that there is increased. It's developmentally, they have to become independent from you and autonomous from you. And that is almost always a messy. On the other hand, cause for concern if there's verbal or physical aggression or running away kind of thing. All of us, typical of adolescence, becoming stressed by everyday decision making. Becoming paralyzed with indecision is a cause for concern. The sleep cycle, you know that it shifts. The urge to be a night owl and to sleep late on weekends kind of thing. Typical of adolescence. But if there were one thing I could fix in every one of your young people that I see, it would get them on a regular sleep cycle. I think I'd see less young people if they were on a regular sleep cycle. They just don't have the strength the next day to build in the willpower and everything else, and they really get themselves messed up, and especially if they're on those phones all night kind of thing. So that's a pretty big one there. You've got a list of them in there. And if you're seeing anything on this cause for concern, you want to be aware of that. And if you're seeing it on a couple of different areas, then that's probably a time to start thinking about getting some professional help. So to meet these skills that they need to get, and to meet or accomplish the developmental tasks, if they're having any challenges with it, if it's getting messy, if the parenting is not making sense to them, if they're having any challenges, so they tend to start, what types of skills and things do they need to accomplish those things? Well, guess what? They need physical activity. They need social interactions. They actually need things that make them nervous or scary. Probably don't need phobias per se, but they do need big feelings because that comes up in them. They need responsibilities that they're actually accountable for. They need parental interactions. They need interactions with other authorities. They actually need to deal with some pain. I didn't have my first real breakup until mid-college, and I'm like, whoa, like probably should have done that earlier so it wasn't as big the next time, but it was still pretty big, you know? Conflict, they need challenges. They need things that could bring vitality and value to their lives. That makes sense. That's a pretty, like, all our young people need that thing. Well, you know what happens when it gets messy? When they're starting to struggle, guess what type of things get avoided? Physical activities, social activities, scary things like feelings, responsibilities, parental interactions, the same exact list of things they need end up getting avoided. Does that make sense to everybody? Are we seeing how this biology and the social interactions start transacting with each other? So again, that brings us into, if they're struggling with those things and if they're not doing this list of behaviors, all right, those behaviors, what they're doing is serving a purpose. So if I am avoiding this feeling of failure that keeps coming up in my head, why am I avoiding responsibility? Well, I don't want to fail again, all right? The sad thing is you don't actually ever see any part of that interaction on the outside, and you've got a kid who's avoiding stuff, and it doesn't make sense, and it's triggered when you ask them to do something that seems like it should be capable of a 13 or a 14-year-old kind of thing, right? And they get good at it, all right? They start coming up with just defense mechanisms, all right? So this avoidance is no longer just going into their room, all right? So let's think about this algebra example that I brought up earlier. If this kept going on, and I've heard this happen in families, like it gets bad, that kid thinks they cannot do algebra, that brings up painful feelings of fear and knowing I'm going to fail, and that means I might not get to graduate or go to the college I want to, yada, 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 and they do that. I mean, that thought process is like a half a second to most of our young people. They come home, they've got an algebra assignment, and before you even get a chance to ask them whether they have an algebra, they pick a fight, all right? So they start arguing about something completely different, all right? They get everything kind of riled up. They run to their room angry. You're like, I don't even know what happened. They slam their door. You're already exhausted, so you're not going to go ask about that algebra homework per se. They're so flustered and upset that, you know, like, I couldn't do it at all now, all right? And none of what we saw was actually the issue that needed to get dealt with. All right, so that's a defense mechanism, and how they might look. So at this point, if you turn to page 3 in your packet, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I actually want you to go down this list, thinking about your young person. Rank these things. 10 would mean it's literally interfering with day-to-day activities, their life in significant ways. 0 ones who, you know, like they do it once in a while, but it doesn't really matter. But if it gets above a 5 or a 6, you know, try and give it a score if it seems like it's a significant thing. So go down the list. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. And see if you can rank your young person. And I'll just tell you, if you start hitting on a bunch of these that are above 6 or 7 on your list, that's a cause for concern. I want everybody that's here or online to actually have some criteria to think about. How do I know if this is problem behavior or if this is just typical adolescence? And this would be one. If you're seeing this and it's interfering with their life, that would be one way to do it. So. And if you're online and you didn't print out the materials, you could just write on a piece of paper its scores and the ones that are big happening in your household. And if any of them don't make sense, it's kind of hard to define some of these in like 5 words. So if they don't make sense, I can explain them a little more. Do I have any chat room comments that I need to respond to? Okay. Give me a sign at 7. I think I'm doing okay, but. Okay.
What if one parent is on one side of the strict scale, the other parent is on the change?
And there's so that actually can be good for a young person if those parents work well together as parents and they talk things out and they make conscious decisions. Now, if it's in opposition to each other, you then end up showing inconsistency to a young person, and inconsistency is literally one of the most challenging things for a young person to navigate. I consistently parent is going to be bad or do this thing that isn't helpful, I can navigate that. I can go around that. On the other hand, if it's inconsistent, that's really damaging. The uncertainty, or you end up with triangulation, and I'm going to go to the parent that I happen to like the answer most often, and they will figure that out very, very quickly. So if you're co-parenting, you know, I mean, honestly, that's, just to get a slightly political on you, that's what our country needs right now, is people at opposite ends talking and working out what the best answer is for their young person in this moment or this event or this phase of their life. That's a good question. I will say, you know, if you go grab the online packet and print this out, and we've added this in, I think it's one of the best changes we've done in our program in the last years. We've added this in, and all the young people also fill this out. I'm in semi-amazement at how honest they are on a regular basis, that they give themselves 8s and 9s and 10s in areas that their parents listed in other words, but it ends up being exactly the same. And then we've added into our program, I want to confront that defense mechanism, you know, on a regular basis. And how am I going to use this skill to confront this defense mechanism so it quits interfering in my life? So if you want to pull one of those down and have your young person do it too and see where you agree, and if you can have a conversation around that, I think that's a really meaningful conversation. On the other hand, some of these get to be so personality traits, quite frankly. Oh, this thing loves me. You know, and so they get highly developed. So again, this is where I'm talking, it's not like they're not learning skills when they're using these defense mechanisms. They are learning ways to navigate the world. It's just not ones that are adding up to really healthy kind of thing. So I would argue that in high school, my parents moved me to new school starting in 7th grade. So brand new, very small town. And my dog got hit on the road because she was used to having no cars around her, and then got hit on the road. And I got told at school, like at lunch hour. All right. And so 7th grader, brand new school. I know no one. I cried in school. And then I'm like, not doing that again. and literally learned how to use humor, because I was good with words and I was good with language and I was funny, to use humor. So if you came up, and I could have been having a horrible day, and you would come up and ask me how I was doing, I guarantee you in a minute, you're laughing, you're walking away going, he's doing fine. All right. That's a highly developed defense mechanism to not actually examine your own negative feelings and pain. Took me some work in my 20s to get over that one. All right. Because that mask usually is used, these defense mechanisms are used to avoid thoughts, they're used to avoid feelings, they're used to avoid responsibility. And the definition of a defense mechanism is anything done to avoid feelings, and especially pain. All right? Because usually we are not biologically capable of just ignoring one emotion. Like, all right, I'm just going to ignore sad. You don't do it. If you start stuffing or sticking or shutting down emotions, you shut them down across the board. You don't feel, you can't get as happy because you're not willing to go down and be any sadder. All right. And so you end up shutting that down. And so avoiding pain actually ends up leading to avoiding all kinds of things. So then it works its way into the avoidance cycle. All right. So we're going to put these things together because avoidance comes across and it can look like, we can think this is depression. I'm not a huge fan of labels. And I'm quite frankly, I've now seen enough adolescents that anxiety and depression actually form something that's kind of different, and despair and self-harm and things like that. But we know for a fact that the avoidance cycle with depression is they reduce total activity. So somebody calls, I actually used to like riding on a bike. My friend calls and asks me to go out on a bike ride. I'm depressed today, so I don't feel like doing that. All right? Well, lots of things that used to give fun and pleasure or a sense of achievement, they're not doing anymore. All right? Well, that ends up worsening how they feel. All right? And that adds to the depression. So we now have a social thing of I'm not feeling well enough to do this, I'm doing less and less, it's actually impacting my biology and pushing me into a deeper depression. All right, so that's the depression avoidance cycle. The anxiety avoidance cycle is I avoid scary things. And again, that can be emotions, that can be bugs, that can be my father when he's drinking, reduced activities, or if it gets to be where I avoid people in large spaces, or I avoid joining a club or something because I can't handle people. Reduced activity, increasingly restricted life, and undermined confidence because you don't believe you can do some things. Worsening how I feel, increase anxiety. Again, the cycle starts playing and both impacting your social world and your biology. All right, so you put them together, you've got anxiety or depression. Somehow there's unhelpful behavior because that's, you know, kind of what you feel like doing. New or worsened problems, worsening of how you feel adds and increases to the depression. So if you are seeing something that's on the problem list, I would argue that you want to deal with it as soon as you can, because this cycle will continue itself and become, I mean, literally, we have worked with young people who don't leave their parents' basements, you know, and barely are even enjoying the video games that they used to do. And it took an immense amount of work to even get that particular young person I'm thinking about to graduate high school. I mean, that's what this cycle does. Is it just, oh, I avoided that thing, and maybe that seems reasonable to everybody else, but now I've learned how to avoid. So now I'm going to avoid the next thing. I'm going to just keep avoiding it. I'm going to keep stepping back until there's nothing there. And it, you know, if you hit this worsening of how I feel, both how I feel physically, but also how I feel about myself. And in DNAV, we talk about that as kind of the advisor, that inner voice that's telling us things to do. So if you turn back to page 3, you can write them down or not write them down, but I want you to spend a minute. I just want you to notice what thoughts come into your head. And if you want, I'm not going to ask any of you to share them. That's probably not comfortable, but I want you to notice the thoughts that come into your head and just sitting here in a minute of silence. All right, finish up that kind of that last thought. And it is actually a fact that we can't control. You can't just tell your mind not to think a thought, or you can't always have control over what just pops into your mind. And give you an example, I actually did this exercise with 800 middle schoolers, actually Shawnee Mission School District. And my favorite, we did it in a bunch of groups, but in a gymnasium, sitting on the floor, actually got complete silence out of these middle schoolers. And I asked them what they were thinking about. And one young man steps up and he's like, Lyme. I didn't really follow up on it, but was it the disease, the color, the flavor? I mean, I don't know, but you just can't control, you know, that thought that pops into your mind. That just happened at that time. In another case, we did this in our room with a young lady who was really, really struggling with depression. So her overall mood was pretty bad most of the time. All right. The day we did this activity, she actually came in, for whatever reason, in a great mood. She was in a good mood to start that day. And we did this activity, and I asked them to write down their thoughts. And then she shared. Her first 3 thoughts were, and again, she's in a good mood, I like to go shopping. Second thought, well, if I'm shopping, I really, really like the Disney store. And then the third one was the Disney store reminds me of this great family vacation we took to Disney World. So those were her first 3 thoughts. Pretty sure I did this for 2 minutes, but literally in a room of adolescents, 2 minutes of silence with them and their own thoughts. Her last 3 thoughts were, I don't fit in anywhere. Nobody really cares for me. Everyone would be better off if I weren't here. So in a span of 2 minutes in her own head, she went from Disneyland to death. All right, so in my world, that's that advisor, that inner voice that starts abusing or self-abusing them inside their heads. And we see it all the time. That inner voice just starts getting more and more negative. And so when you wonder, like, well, what just triggered this outburst? It literally could have been a thought inside their own head that caused them to feel something that makes no sense on the outside, and they are reacting to it completely. All right, so that's the advisor voice. If it gets to be as drastic as this young lady's were, you know, so it's abusing all the time, it literally starts putting a filter over how they interact with the world. I'm going to assume most of you know what a filter is. You put them on a camera. Well, I think we've got some filters up here on lights, you know, just can we put a dramatic spotlight? Can we change the color? Can we change the mood with lighting kind of thing? And so I want to do an experiment. This is when you guys at home, I need you to get that glass I asked you to get and have it with you. The rest of you all have a translucent kind of folder. Those were not given to you just for fun. They actually have a purpose. So if you take the paper and the card out of it, I'm going to have you use it. In my world, this filter has 3 parts to it. It has a thick part where there's 2 layers. And we're going to start there. I'm going to put an image on the screen and ask you to look through the thick part. And then I'm going to ask you to look through the thin part and change it a little bit. And then I'm going to ask you to clear and clear and just look at the screen. All right. The button. Anybody see that? Shh, don't tell me. All right. Don't, you know. Home, try and look like just through the glass at the image that comes up on your screen. So if everybody put their double layer of their filter up in front of them, I'm going to put an image on the screen. And, all right, guy with blue folder and blue shirt over here. What do you see? Wow, you got good eyes. Woman with orange folder behind him. What can you see? Nothing? Anybody else see anything interesting? Oh, all right. A horse head? All right, everybody go down 1 level. Anybody see anything different now? I happen to know your name. So Allison, what do you see? All right, everybody go clear it and clear. I tried to mix it up and put in a new image. It might not have worked as well, but that image didn't change at all while you were looking at it. And so if you couldn't see it clearly, that was because you have a filter in front of you. Does that make sense? Keep your folders out. We got 1 more to go. But I want to talk about filters. Again, filters aren't a good or a bad thing. We all have them. We kind of have to have them to navigate the world. You know, we might lean progressive, we might lean conservative. Those are filters that we put on in how we view the world. Teens at times have like, I'm bulletproof, I'm invulnerable. That's one of their filters. So, you know, there's different kind of filters. You know, a young person that's just struggling with just anxiety has one type of filter. Struggling with depression is a different type of filter of how they interact with the world. A teen identifying as gay, lesbian, gender fluid, pansexual, questioning, other, that's a different type of filter to see the world. At the bottom there, you got teens with multiple challenging factors. And this list came from I had a chance to meet with all the social workers at Children's Mercy Hospital a couple of years ago, and they were at the time doing 1,800 adolescent suicide screenings a year, and that was actually 1,800 young people who somebody else was already concerned that they were suicidal and sent them there for a checkup and to see. And they would say the majority of who they talked to and why these young people were suicidal fit into these 5 categories. 1, lack of meaningful connections in their life. So they didn't feel connected to people. Actual anxiety, depression, eating disorder diagnoses, gender questions, family conflict, and then finally purpose, life, existential questioning. The whole, you know, what's the purpose? Why? What's the point of life? And so when I meet a young person who's struggling with any one of those, flag to me. And if I meet a young person who is dealing with 2 or more from that list, I just assume that there's some suicidal ideation going on, that they're actually thinking the world would be better off without them at times. That makes sense to everybody? All right. Children's Mercy, because of how many they were seeing shortly after that discussion, changed their policy from having to have a kid sent there to get a suicide assessment to, if you show up for an earache, they're going to do a suicide ideation or a suicidal assessment on you. That's how big they think the problem is. All right. Everybody put your filters back up. Look through the double layer. I'm going to hopefully not give it away this time. All right. All right. Lady with kindness on her shirt. What do you see?
I literally,
Is it at least greenish?
it's green. I can't see anything.
Okay. It's a filter. It's possible. All right. Way back in the back, purple. Yeah. Looks orange on the outside. All right. Can't deny that. Couple sitting here, or ma'am with the orange one. Yeah. You're like, this is the best thing he's ever done for us right here. All right, everybody go down 1 layer. Is the blue one, is that one easy to see through? All right, I got rid of a bunch that I thought were way in the back. Blue shirt, blue folder. Can you see anything? You can see hate. All right, can anybody else see anything different than that? Have? Also love? All right, everybody go clear it and clear. I would argue if a young person's advisor has gotten to that point where it's self-abusing it's them and it's beating them up, they can no longer tell that love or acceptance or tolerance or anything else is coming in. They just take it and they beat themselves up with it. All right? That filter's gotten so dark that they can't tell the difference. I do like that some of these filters can only see hate. Some of them, you probably had a better view, like you could just see love really clearly. Let's all keep trying to develop that filter in our young person. Everybody understand this whole filter concept? This, you know, this is influencing, and when we think about working with a young person in an intensive program, our hope is to take them from where whatever is there is so dark that they can't see positives about themselves or in the world. In the program, we're probably only moving them up here, you know, and that the trajectory needs to go, but that we're working on young people figuring out how to clear that filter out. At some point, I had to explain how decent life to why they were completely filled with shame, self-loathing to the point that they wanted to die. And so this is kind of the logic model or logic that I put together. So born, and again, we had talked about this, biological anxiety. They started with some kind of emotion dysregulation. We'll just call it a filter. All right. Someone doesn't talk to them or rejects them, becomes discouragement. All right. And this is not like, I hate you, or this is just getting picked second, or, you know, kids are playing over there and they didn't invite me to play. because their emotion dysregulation, they're starting to interpret that as just, that they're getting rejected. Literally, if you are self-aware, if you're in parallel play with somebody, they're not playing with you. All right, does that make sense? I mean, this is not huge, like you got fired or people are bullying you. This is just, discouragement, or they feel rejected a lot. That discouragement becomes I don't fit in thought, repeated by that advisor voice. It just keeps cycling in their brain. If I don't fit in, becomes something something is wrong with me. And I would say there's a difference there, and that's still in something must be wrong with me phase. They're doing things like, if I got the right Crocs and I put the right little cute little things in them, I might fit in. Or, they're like, well, if I could go to a different school, can we change schools and let me go over here? Or can I join a different dance team or a different baseball team? They're still trying to figure that out. And in each of these areas, it's probably internal, not external, that's causing them to feel like they're not fitting in. And that turns into this actual thought that something must be wrong with me. So that's the progression there. But then that thought, something is wrong with me, and again, you're not seeing much of this on the outside, to be quite honest. Gets repeated over years. Something is wrong with me becomes I'm a bad person. If I'm a bad person, then I can't be loved, cared for. If I can't be loved, I'm not worthy and I have no value. I may as well end everyone's pain by not being alive. Does that progression make sense? I've shared that with a lot of young people and not had any of them deny that their thoughts go in this direction or argue with me. So at this point, they've developed a self-abusing advisor filter that distorts all interactions, including loving, validating interactions. Think about a young person entering our program or who's struggling, anxiety, depression, any of these things. I think about having to work on two different areas. One, they actually have symptoms, all right? So when they say they feel depressed and they don't have energy to do something, they don't have energy to they actually feel that, all right? Or if they're anxious and they're having a panic attack, their heart is actually beating harder and they are sweaty and that door is scary looking. So they have these actual symptoms and they have to learn how to cope with them. But on top of that, they have to cope with what they think about themselves. And we have to cope all the time with what we think about ourselves, all right? It's a good night for me. I'm feeling okay talking to a crowd like this. But on a day that was rough, or I've already had a fight with my wife, or a kid's frustrated me, I don't think as well about myself, and I don't. Who knows if I do a different, like you can distinguish it. But in my head, I don't think I did as good a job. All right, that's what that means, is that we all have to deal with or cope with what we think of ourselves, and it impacts every domain of our lives. It impacts all of those domains of that the young people have to, the tasks and skills that they have to work in and learn and accomplish. I'm not going to have you put your filter up, but I would argue that this leads, if that filter gets too dark, what ends up happening is they no longer can see hope. All right, if I can't see hope and I'm in pain, I may as well end it. And this is when we start getting into, usually suicide is an impulsive act. All right, and that means the opportunity or something came up or something was so bad and act impulsively. I would argue that the hope we're moving, and there are different types of hope, that the hope we're moving for is not like a spiritual hope. I mean, I have a hope in my eternity kind of thing, but in the literature, this would be a hope that I have control, some control over tomorrow being better than today. All right, not just that there happens to be a light at the other end of the tunnel that I might get to, not just that, the lottery is going to hit and I'm going to get a whole bunch of money. That is a kind of hope, but this is a hope that says I have some influence on whether tomorrow will be better than today is. That's the kind. They feel some ability to manage that. So at the end of the day, put this down, and this is how I am choosing to define eggshells. So therefore, eggshells equal anything that triggers that fight, flight, or freeze response that we looked at earlier. all right? And so this is a cycle. If a young person goes into it, the dark black line, this is what's going to happen. They're leaving this normal where they can engage socially. They're shooting up. They're going through rage, panic, fear, irritation. If it keeps going up, they're going to freeze and have dissociation or shame or shut down or hopelessness. And then hopefully it comes back down. The lighter line is what we see the progression of avoidance. So the avoidance cycle. So in this case, do I have a laser? Oh, I have a laser. This is the avoidance cycle, all right? So a young person is taking a risk. They're trying something, maybe. Well, I don't really have a laser. So they're trying something. They get up here and they're sympathetic, you know, whatever, kicks in, and they're up there and they choose to avoid it. All right, so they choose to avoid it. They're back calm and they're okay. Next time the same thing comes up, well, it shoots them higher. Like, all right, I don't even think I'm capable of doing whatever this task is now, so I'm going higher. And then hopefully they come back down here. But eventually, over time, they're getting to the point where they're not even getting back to where they could learn that skill or that task. So this avoidance cycle is adding up to a place where they are not getting the same skills and abilities that their peers or that they're supposed to have at their developmental age. That makes sense? So in our program, when we work on things, our hope is that as we ask young people to do things, they put in a different coping skill, like square breathing or something else right there, that gets them calm enough to be able to do whatever that task is. And in areas where we know that they've lost skills, they didn't learn what they needed to learn in that 12 to 14-year-old age or whatever that is, then we have to reteach those skills to hopefully work them back down this pattern. So it's not just a matter of going in and chatting with a counselor and figuring out that you were okay in your childhood. It's actually like, I'm not capable of doing the thing I'm developmentally supposed to be doing right now. And they have to relearn some of that. Are there any questions? This is a good point for questions. I'm going to shift gears on you here. All right. So one consistent trigger, you know, if we talk about triggers, is external and internal validation or invalidation. And a filter that gets, you know, dark and self-abusive is literally self-invalidating on a regular basis. Super quick, turn to page 5. I put this in your, I think I put it in your packet too. But validation communicates to another person that his feelings, thoughts, and actions make sense and are understandable to you in a particular situation. All right, this is not that you're okay with it. It's not that you accept it or that it's right. It just makes sense that you just, I don't know, it's the best one I can come up with at the moment, but I worked outside all day. I was in the sun all day, and now you want me, my wife would regularly at that point want me to go like out and have fun with her. And I'm like, I'm exhausted. Doesn't make it right if we had a date planned and I had used up all my energy and everything. But the validation is I can understand. Point. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's not saying that they're right or that it's okay what they're doing. It's just validating that I understand how you got here. Self-validation is the ability to do that on your own. And invalidation communicates, and this is intentionally or not, through words and actions, that another person's feelings, thoughts, and actions in a particular situation make no sense, are manipulative or stupid and overreaction, or not worthy of your time and interest. I want to share, you know, on page 5, you've got a list. What we do with young people is actually have them write out validating things that validate them and things that invalidate them. And that's a really good exercise, and I put it in there blank because that's a good conversation to have with your young person. But I'm going to share you I'm going to start with the invalidating ones, but these are some that we've collected over the last couple years. Actions that make you feel invalidated. Do it again. You're not, fill in the blank with any term you'd like. I'm busy. Just get along. Blaming me for things. You're fine. Other people may have it worse. Just smile. I don't care. You're weird. Go talk to your therapist. When people talk about you behind your back. The phrase, because I said so. You look tired. Being left out. You're late. I'll just do it myself. Materialistic response to emotion. It's a young person who parents didn't wanted to avoid their emotions and kid had a really nice car and all kinds of resources, but really wanted emotional response and connection. You're overreacting. Just calm down. People not actually listening. Just get over it. It's that time of the month. Is it that time of the month? Go back to jail where you belong. Stop making excuses. You're not actually suicidal. Overreacting to self-harm or isolation. You're just doing this for attention. All right, again, I didn't make up a single one of those. Now, these are the validating statements from young people. I believe you. Letting me sleep when it appears I need to be asleep. Listening to me. You look good today. It's not your fault. When people understand. You're so pretty. Standing up for me. I'm here for you. Being invited to parties. Positive reinforcement. Statements like you did your best. I miss you. You're beautiful. I love you, princess. Making my lunch. Smiles. Saying hello. Teachers being understanding and kind. Respect. You're beautiful without makeup. Being invited to things. Getting remembered. Getting gifts, even little baby ones. Showing effort that they care. Being with people I love. Being told you're talented. Specific to me, not just general. Specific to me kind of thing. Trying to understand my interests. Your hard work is paying off. I've thrown that list if you want to read it into the online packet also. So with that, I'm going to skip a couple things here just for time's sake and to get us out on time. But validation and invalidation, and quite frankly, everything we've talked about up to this point interferes with trust or, and earning trust. Because if you're walking on eggshells, you're not actually trusting your kid. You don't know what's going to happen. Same with them, all right? Trust, it exists on a continuum. It's not always fair. It is earned. It can be damaged, repaired, and rebuilt. You see trustworthy behavior, you've got to give more freedom. You got to determine how much trust each child in each situation. It's not like you get to give blind trust to all your kids in the same way. Broken trust damages relationship. And honestly, if trust is broken repeatedly, you may need to get help, as it could be a signal that something else is going on. And that's quite frankly both directions. And when I started today, I talked about divorce. Divorce is a break of trust for a young person. That's a betrayal. This is not the way the world was supposed to be. All right? Might even be better for them, but it's not the way it was supposed to be, and that's a broken trust. Can I get you to hit? If you guys would turn to page 6 in your packet, look at that as you watch this quick video.
Ever wonder why some couples make it and others don't? Scientist Dr. John Gottman did. He spent 40 years studying thousands of couples to find out exactly what separates the relationship masters from the relationship disasters. Shakespeare compared love to a rose. Gottman uses a different metaphor, an emotional bank account. You know how a regular bank account works, so what's an emotional bank account? It represents the positive and negative balance in your relationship. The best couples maintain a high balance. Couples that break up are often in the red. You make deposits through positive interactions, and you withdraw through negative ones. What does a deposit look like? It's a simple act of showing your partner that you care for and support them. It's as easy as sending your partner a good luck text before a meeting or cooking them dinner after a long day. And pay attention when your partner shows you their admiration and support. Notice when they're investing in your relationship.
Thank you.
A withdrawal is either hurtful behavior toward your partner or ignoring their invitations to connect. But withdrawals and deposits don't have equal weight. In fact, Gottman found it takes 5 positive interactions to make up for 1 negative one. Happy couples maintain at least this 5-to-1 ratio. If you make constant deposits and keep your balance high, you're saving up for a rainy day when you'll need to cash in on that goodwill. Gottman notes that small daily deposits, like asking your partner how their day was, is far more important than the occasional over-the-top romantic gesture. Positivity leads to more positivity. This is not about keeping score. It's about investing in your relationship and your shared emotional bank account, moving from me to we. So keep your balance high by doing nice things every day and recognizing when your partner does them for you. You'll build up that emotional bank account in no time.
Gotta let the video finish on the on that screen also. So it's, you know, that talks about it in couples, and again, going back to like the lenient versus strict couple that was talking, these are really important that you keep those balances in check and keep in a positive zone. But this also works, young people understand this concept. And so if you look at that page 6, you've got an opportunity to like look at your own household and yourself. It is page 6, yes. You know, and give what's going on in your household that actually adds deposits: courtesy, kindness, openness, respect. And our relationships: exclusion, disrespect, being negative. And so I'm going to give you a minute or two. I just want you to check these, go through, think about your own household. We do this with both young people and their parents, and it's really usually a good discussion. But I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that. And again, evaluate your own household. Are you a validating environment? Are you an invalidating environment in your household right now? So I'm hoping you gotten started on that and are willing to kind of finish that and examine your own household kind of things. So I think it's really important. I don't know any of you, but I'm actually feeling like I've sounded like I've made it hard to, how do we figure out how to validate our kids without doing more damage? And so real quickly, I want to just share 4. There are effective ways to validate, praise, and give feedback. So, you know, really praising effort, and these also apply to, say, develop a flexible mindset or growth mindset. Praise effort. You know, when a young person does something well, you can say, wow, you worked hard on that. You didn't give up. And again, that doesn't mean the outcome matters per se. Praise strategy. When a young person is careful in making a tough decision, you can say it's great that you consider before making that decision. Praise choices. When they stand up for something that matters or a value. Give corrective feedback. When a young person does poorly, you can say, your study time might have been too low for this exam. How can you go about increasing your time commitment? So there's 4 concrete ways to think about giving praise and validation. And I think those are really important, because at the end of the day, regardless of where your young person is at on any of these trajectories that we've talked about, I think the most important relationship is their relationship with you guys as their parent. They need that, and so I've given you a tool. You guys got a set of them when you came in, but in your packet on page 8, you've got a list of conversation questions, conversation card questions, and these are just, they're meant to be a conversation. They're not meant to be me telling you what a good life is. It's me listening to you say what you think a good life is, and then you telling me, or me getting a chance to tell you what I think a good life is. And so they're not right or wrong. They're not meant to be teachable moments. But all of them increase the willingness in a young person to think life matters. So it increases their values. It makes them think about what matters to them. And so you guys got a card deck. A lot of people use them at dinner table and have everybody, you know, at the table answer that question, just one a day. There's use them in different ways. But you've got the list of questions at home in the packet. There, you've got a list of them. I don't know that the cards make a big difference, but they're kind of fun. Just moving forward, we're going to continue to go through BOLD concepts. So the BOLD is breathe, observe, listen, decide. It's a process for making those decisions within that window of tolerance that incorporate both how you feel and rationally know what should be done. And so over the next September 22nd, we got 3 more sessions. On the 22nd, we're gonna really hit on ways that you can help improve the emotional regulation, the cognitive regulation, and go through a young person's distress tolerance cycle and some of the things you can do to change that distress tolerance cycle, or that cycle that goes to unhealthy coping. In October, we're going to look at self-regulation and behavioral regulation and value clarification that impacts both of those. And so again, trying to give you tools on every one of the skill domains that I think are important and that the literature says is important. And then we're going to finish up with interpersonal regulation, so relationships and how to help those skills, dealing with ongoing pain, and plans that change on you. I'm not going to spend much energy, but our program, you put our model together, and it's suggesting that as you move towards what matters to you, you become more open and authentic. And then you've got some of the things we talked about, defense mechanisms and masking. I put it in the slides. If you're in a place where you're looking for a counselor, you should actually believe you have some say in that. You should expect a counselor to have history of working with teens and can share their experience. You should expect to be kept in the loop. Within 4 to 6 sessions, you should be able to see changes, improvements, or get reasonable explanations why not. Michael's a new therapist, and we literally, as part of one of his, was like, you're going to take this slow. Like, there's not going to be anything visible on the outside for months. And we explained that to the family, and it actually did what we thought it would do. The young person needed to have some trust level built up long before actual change could happen. I believe young people only improve in the context of their family, so you're not going to find me doing much individual therapy with a young person. I'm going to drag their parents in and make you all talk together. But I just think you should have some expectations out there on the people that you're going to choose to interact. I have an amazing team. Most of them have some daytime sessions available. And again, this is what we do. So that's all I got. I wasn't sure how long that would take. I got it in an hour and a half, or just about. Are there any questions that burning? You can send them to me. If you put them in the chat room, I will either, I'll like write them up and say I'm going to deal with this in week 2 or episode 2, or I'll answer that question because it was a good question and I'll post it somewhere. We are posting this recording, the slides, and the packet. You'll be able to get them by hopefully next Wednesday, depending on how my life goes. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you all for joining us online, those that survived that. I'm not quite used to that world, so hopefully it was still meaningful. Thank you all for coming out.